Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to Digital Defense, our weekly cybersecurity show, broadcasting from Bloomberg News, Washington, D.C. Bureau. I'm Jordan Robertson, cybersecurity reporter for Bloomberg. This is an interactive show. We cover a lot of topics, and please feel free, wherever you're watching this, to write in with questions, as we will do our best to answer as many of them as we can. So we have an interesting topic today. There was a pretty crazy arrest that was leaked in the Russian press yesterday that has a lot of implications potentially for what happened in the U.S. in terms of election hacking. I'm going to scroll to a news story here. We'll just jump right in. This is what happened yesterday. A lead researcher for Kaspersky Lab, which is one of the biggest cybersecurity companies, was arrested in Moscow, as was a top official with the Russian FSB, which is the agency that followed along after the KGB. It's the main intelligence agency within Russia, and the official who was arrested, along with this Kaspersky Lab researcher, was in charge of the division of the FSB that American officials believe was responsible for the election hacking leading up to the U.S. presidential election. This is interesting for a lot of reasons. We don't know a lot about the charges, and we don't know a lot about the specifics of the investigation, but we do actually know a fair bit about this guy, the Kaspersky guy, because we at Bloomberg had done a story back in 2015, on Kaspersky, which Kaspersky actually didn't like very much, but it was a good story. It was a good story about the Russian military's connections to Kaspersky. Again, Kaspersky is a Russian company, and they do business in Russia. They're headquartered in Russia, and as any company that does business in their home country knows, you develop ties to the government if you're big enough. So that's the case with Kaspersky. So let me just walk this back a little bit here. So what happened was, there's this guy named Ruslan Stoyanov. That's the Kaspersky Lab analyst. He's in charge of a division within Kaspersky that handles hacking-related investigations. It's kind of a nebulous title, kind of a vague job description, but nevertheless, he's an important individual within the company. Works in their legal department, but has a kind of very specialized role in terms of a liaison, serving as a liaison to the Russian government, particularly the FSB. And this arrest kind of comes as a bolt out of the blue, because cybersecurity researchers don't really get arrested for much of anything. A lot of the work that these folks do is they analyze malware. Their software is on client networks, and when those client networks are attacked, they'll analyze the malware. They'll generate signatures to block, future attacks, things like that. It's an interesting business, but it's also a pretty kind of routine business. So for somebody to be involved with a senior intelligence official who was arrested and who's also believed to potentially have been involved, with U.S. election hacking, raises a lot of interesting questions. So the reason I wanted to discuss this guy on our show today is, again, we don't know a lot about the charges, but we do know a lot about this guy, and that stems from our earlier story. So this guy, Ruslan, is a former, Russian law enforcement official. He was a cyber crimes investigator, and then he started a security company. Before he worked for Kaspersky, he started a denial of service protection technology company. He ran that for a number of years, and then that company was absorbed into Kaspersky in, I think, 2012 or 2013. The interesting part about that is this guy, again, is not just some researcher in the company who, is alleged to have gotten involved in some, potentially criminal behavior. His technology forms the basis for Kaspersky Labs' denial of service protection, which many companies use, many companies in the U.S. use. But most importantly, the reason many of you may be familiar with Kaspersky is their biggest business is consumer antivirus software, especially sold through deals like the company has with Best Buy. If you go into Best Buy and buy a computer, chances are Kaspersky Lab software will either be pre-installed on your machine, or they'll try to sell it to you as you check out. So the company has a really large presence in the U.S., and again, their main product is kind of traditional standard antivirus software. However, this guy doesn't do that within the company. Again, he created a denial of service protection technology, but his actual role within the company is, again, a little vague. He does hacking-related investigations, which you can imagine, brings him and the company in closer contact with the intelligence services in Russia and law enforcement. And again, he's former law enforcement. As I said at the top of the show, we want to welcome questions here, and we've got one of them coming in right now. So I'll get back to this in a second. The question that's come in here is, do you think Wall Street is safe from hacking? The answer is nobody's safe from hacking. The banks and trading firms are a huge target, for hacking attempts because of the ability to move money. I mean, any money-moving system, as we've heard it described to us by security experts, is going to be a big target for attacks, but it's also going to be, a large focus for defense as well. So, the question is kind of broad. I mean, do we think Wall Street is safe from hacking? The answer is going to be no, but there is a caveat there. I mean, every bank, every major financial institution in the world now that moves any significant amount of money knows that what is being targeted on their networks primarily is, customer data is interesting, but it's not going to, it's not going to crash the economy. Money-moving systems will. So, everybody that we've talked to inside stock exchanges and inside major banks say that it's not a secret that hackers are targeting those systems, and those tend to be very well protected. Doesn't mean they can't be penetrated, doesn't mean they can't be compromised, but there's a lot of attention paid to them. Next question here is, has Putin spoken publicly about the hacking? What does he say? It's an interesting question because Putin, before the election, gave an interview to Bloomberg News television, where he said that he was kind of coy about the whole topic. He was kind of smirking of election hacking, topic of election hacking, and he said that of course we don't, we in Russia don't do hacking. That's not something that we as a country do. However, the leak of the documents about the Democratic Party was a public service because it showed how party officials were, in league together against the Bernie Sanders campaign. So he called it a public service that this hacked information was leaked, and he did it with kind of a wry smile. And subsequent to that, as the U.S. has released a lot of data, about why we believe the Russian government, was behind those attacks. Putin has kind of reiterated earlier statements. He'll never come right out and say, "Yeah, we did the hacks and this was a great thing," but he has stated repeatedly that this was that served a public good. Next question here is: with potential border taxes and a border wall, should travelers be worried about their security? Are travelers more at risk of being hacked? Actually, yes. Depends what kind of job you have, frankly. As reporters or as diplomats or as business people are often advised, anytime you pass through a border crossing, you're passing from, the oversight of one government to another, and those are actually really good opportunities for, malware to be inserted on your computers. Now, again, if you're kind of an ordinary, citizen and you're traveling for leisure, and you don't work in what might be considered a sensitive job, if you're not an intelligence analyst, if you're not a politician, you probably don't have a ton to worry about because the border agents, are not going to be interested in planting malware on your computer. If, however, you do occupy one of those sensitive positions, we in the media and again, folks in business and government, are often advised to take special care when that happens because, again, once you cross over that border into a foreign country, those border agents are employees of that government. And if that government is interested in what's on your computer, what's on your phone, they can detain you at the airport, search through your stuff disappears out of the room for 10 minutes, and it comes back with stuff on it that you don't want. That's a real concern. That's a realistic concern. And that's why if you're doing any, extensive international travel, and you have reason to believe that you may be in a position to be targeted by a foreign government, for hacking, that you bring along you leave your regular computer, your regular phone at home, and you bring along kind of burner devices. So clean devices that have never been used before, and that don't have any sensitive data on them. And then when you get back, you wipe the operating system and you start over. So I hope that helps. Next question here is the U.S. retaliating against Russia? I would actually invert this question by way of answering it. So this arrest, some people are seeing this arrest as a form of retaliation by Russia against the U.S. for the data that we revealed. So again, it's a theory at this point. It's not proven, but there is a theory going around that because the Russian intelligence official who was arrested, basically ran the unit that U.S. officials believe was responsible for part of this election hacking, and that this Kaspersky Lab analyst was arrested at the same time, that perhaps they passed, intelligence to U.S. officials. Perhaps they were working, on the payroll for the CIA. Again, speculation, but the timing, the position of the Russian intelligence official, the fact that Kaspersky Labs, this individual, has close ties to the government by the nature of his job. So I would say there are some folks here in Washington and in the security community, who believe that these arrests of this Kaspersky individual and the FSB individual, may well be retaliation by Russia for leaked information out of that country. In regard to the question of is the U.S. retaliating against Russia, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on a number of individuals, notably not including the one who was arrested and leaked yesterday, but his agency is kind of well known. And we've heard, President Trump talk about how sanctions are not effective. Lots and lots of folks believe that they are, because what that does is the sanctions limit the ability to travel for a lot of these individuals, and the ability to get access to any funds stored, across border. So, every data point we have, shows that sanctions do have an effect, and that's the primary way the U.S. is retaliating against Russia, at present, for the election hacking. But an interesting side note would be, if these arrests are related to the election hacking, and if these arrests are related to any information that the U.S. disclosed prior to the election of President Trump, one important historical note here to remember is the reason the U.S. released so much data, about the election hacking wasn't necessarily because the Obama administration felt that it was a grave danger to democracy. He may have believed that, but that wasn't the stated reason. The reason that much information was released may have been in part that, but it was also largely because, now President Trump, was so adamant that it didn't occur. So there was a big push within the intelligence community to release as much data as possible about those election hacks so that it would be in the public domain. Congress could investigate it, the FBI could investigate it, and there would be some public discussion about that. And what folks in the intelligence community are talking about right now is, if any sensitive data, appeared in those reports that, Moscow was able to trace back to leaks out of their country, and if those leaks had anything to do with this guy Ruslan and the intelligence official in Moscow, that's potentially really damaging to our ability to collect intelligence, if indeed, and again, unproven, and this is speculation, if indeed these guys were actual intelligence assets, whether witting or unwitting intelligence assets for the U.S. Next question to come in here is, how unusual is it for a high-level executive like Ruslan to be charged with treason? Does it happen in the U.S. as well? It's a good question. I forgot to mention this. The charge that these guys are being arrested under is treason. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the same in Russia as it does here. It can, but it also encompasses, a lot of other things as per the statute in Russia. Basically anything that could be seen as harming the state's interest. That could be, all the way from, sharing national security secrets with the U.S. government, down to sharing information that may have made its way to the U.S. that Russia sees as damaging to its interests. But yes, these individuals are being charged and arrested under a treason statute. It's very rare. I mean, we've had instances in the U.S. where individuals have been arrested from the intelligence community and charged and convicted of treason. But those have typically been the kind of classic espionage model where they, these are U.S. individuals who become assets of a foreign government, and they're usually accepting payment. And that's typically the way this stuff works. We don't know the nature of the alleged offenses here against these folks, but if it involved, and again, we're speculating here, but if it involved, this senior Russian official passing information to a private sector individual like Ruslan, and that information somehow making it to the U.S. or, some other foreign government, that's a pretty interesting chain of custody when it comes to, really sensitive national security information. So it's not unprecedented that we would see an arrest like this. However, considering the circumstances and if there is a connection to our election hacking here in the U.S., the chain of custody is actually what's interesting here, because this isn't some sole intelligence official who's been corrupted by payments from the CIA. this would involve a number of people in the private sector as well. Next question here is what kind of legislation does the U.S. have in regards to cyber activity and cyber attacks? Well, this question touches on an issue that really has been a swamp here in Washington. I mean, there have been folks pushing for years to pass through cybersecurity legislation. And despite the kind of generic sounding title, really what that legislation has been trying to do is give companies legal immunity to share attack and other data with the U.S. government. And there are a lot of legitimate reasons to oppose this legislation, which the government says, look, we know what's happening on government networks. We know what's happening at the network level because the NSA and other agencies have very good visibility at the ISP level, at the telco level. That's historically what they've done. They don't have great visibility into what's happening inside companies. They can see what goes into companies, what comes out of companies, but inside those networks, they really don't have great visibility unless the company has previously let them in. So what a lot of folks here in Washington have been trying to do for a long time is to say we're going to give those companies legal immunity for sharing data, that may be in violation of state privacy laws. Like if a bank like JP Morgan says, okay, FBI, we're going to share all the attack data we have with you, but we need protection that if we release customer data, the two things won't happen. One, that we won't be sued successfully because we did that, and two, that our competitors won't get it, that it won't leak or won't be hacked, by the Chinese or the Russians. So that's why that legislation has really stalled out. There isn't meaningful sharing of that sort right now, and it's kind of unlikely that we're going to see any meaningful change in that because of those legal issues that involves. Next question here is, could private companies or organizations retaliate against Russia independently? This is another issue that we've studied quite a bit in cybersecurity, because if you're a company, well, let's take the DNC for example. If you're an organization, a political organization or a company, you've been hacked by Russia. You have a pretty good idea through your own network telemetry and security software of where that data went. Let's say you're able to identify the server in Brazil, where, as was the case with JP Morgan, when it got hacked. Its hacked data went to a server in Brazil. The bank knew where that data was, but by law, the bank is prohibited from taking any action to go get that data back from that server, because that would be hacking as well. It's also prohibited by law from hacking back and taking out the servers of whoever it believed did those attacks. The reason that's illegal, I mean, it's emotionally satisfying to be able to say, you hacked me, I know who you are through various mechanisms. Cybersecurity software is very good these days. I'm going to hit you back. The reason that's illegal is a pretty straightforward one. Many hacked computers, or computers that hackers use to hack other people, are hacked themselves. So it's my computer or your home computer, your server, or whatever. And, hackers piggyback on those machines to hack other people. So JP Morgan or the DNC gets upset about their hacking attack, and they hit back. The chances that they're hitting back at a peaceful person's computer or just a kind of an innocent victim's computer is pretty high. So there are lots of folks within the business world and the political world who say this should be a lot easier to do. But the concept that comes up, especially in the government realm, where the government can hit back at whomever it chooses, is this idea of cyber escalation. It's a lot harder to stop a tit-for-tat battle in cyberspace than actually it is on the battlefield, because it's so much easier to launch a cyber attack. It's so much easier to disguise the nature and the origin of those attacks. So the potential for escalation, and pretty dramatic escalation, is something that military and intelligence officials think about a lot. So so with that, we're going to be wrapping up here, and I do want to let you know we're going to be following the story closely. There may even be more arrests that, and if there are, we'll certainly report on them here. And as there are further developments, we'll, bring it to you all next week. And as always, if you want to write me some questions offline, my Twitter handle is @JordanR1000. Thanks for everybody for watching, and we'll see you again next week.